Hi there! Welcome to the Thea Tote Bag sewing tutorial by Sunday Sewing Club. You'll find all the details on printing and assembling your pattern, the materials you'll need, and how to cut your fabric and lining on pages 5 to 9 of your instruction booklet. Now for the fun part, let's get into the sewing tutorial. We're going to start by quilting the outer bag. First, draw lines on the right side of your main body piece and both side panels. You'll want to draw them parallel to the long edge of the fabric using tailor's chalk or an erasable fabric pen. There's a clear diagram on page 10 of your instruction booklet that shows how to space the lines, but here's a quick overview. The outer line should be 4 cm or 1 5/8 of an inch from each edge, and then the inner line should be spaced at 3 cm intervals or 1 1/4 inch intervals across the fabric piece. This will keep your quilting consistent while leaving room for a 1 cm or 3/8 inch seam allowance. Next, cut your main body piece and both side panels out of the wadding. Leave a border of around 5 cm or 2 inches all the way around so you've got some leeway in case the fabric shifts while quilting. Pin the fabric to the wadding to hold it in place and try to put your pins in between the quilting lines so they don't get in the way while you sew. Quilt along each line you marked using a straight stitch set to a 3.0 length. Start and finish sewing about 2 cm or 1 inch from the edge of the fabric, which will secure the stitches without needing to backstitch. Continue until you have quilted all the marked lines on the main body and side panel pieces. If this is your first time quilting with wadding, take your time and focus on gently guiding the fabric through the machine because it will bunch up around your presser foot. I find it really helpful to keep one hand either side of the needle to hold the layers flat as I sew. Once the quilting is complete, trim the excess wadding so it's flush with the fabric edges. If you're planning to add a label to your bag, now is a great time to sew it on. Place it about 10 cm or 4 inches down from one of the shorter edges on the main body. We're going to make the 2 handles now. Pair the 4 handle pieces together with right sides facing so that you have 2 sets. Then, pin each handle to the wadding along its long edges and trim the wadding so it's flush with the fabric. Sew down both long edges of each handle with a 1 cm or 3/8 inch seam allowance. Use a regular stitch length of 2.4 and backstitch at both ends to secure. Turn each handle right side out so that the right sides of the fabric are on the outside and the wadding is fully enclosed. This will be quite fiddly and take a bit of time, but it will get much easier when you're about halfway through the handle. After this, you can press each handle flat. Finally, top stitch a line straight down the middle of each handle using a 3.0 stitch length and back stitching at the beginning and end. Now that we've finished with the quilting, we're going to start piecing the outer bag together. This is probably the hardest part of the pattern, so take your time with it and watch the instructions a few times to understand. First, we're going to sew one of the side panels to the main body, right sides together and matching the notches. However, instead of sewing to the end of the seam, stop when you're 1 cm or 3/8 of an inch away from the bottom corner and finish the seam with back stitching. When you're sewing over the wadding, be prepared for it to catch on your presser foot. Go slowly and gently and pull it away from the foot as needed. You can see I'm also lifting my fabric a lot to check that I'm still aligned with the correct seam allowance, as it will be difficult to see your fabric underneath the wadding. Where your seam ends, snip horizontally from the fabric edge to the stitching, being careful not to snip your thread. This will help the fabric pivot neatly around the bottom of the bag. Now pivot the side panel 90 degrees to align the short edge with the main body and repeat this process again. Start sewing right where the other stitching stops, and again, only sew to 1 cm or 3/8 of an inch before the edge of the fabric. Repeat the snip and pivot motion one last time to attach the final edge of this side panel to the main body. This time you can sew all the way to the fabric edge. Now that one side of the outer bag is done, we're going to sew the other. I won't show the whole process again because it is exactly the same, but start by placing the second side panel alongside the main body and then continue sewing the 3 sides with the same snip and pivot motion as before. Your outer bag should now look a little something like this. You can now turn the bag right side out and poke out the corners with something pointy like tweezers. Press the seams from the right side to sharpen the shape of the bag. You can also press along the bottom edge to help shape the base, even though there's no seam there. We've now finished sewing the outer bag and we're going to move on to the pockets and the lining. Take one pocket piece and fold the top edge, which is the one without any notches, over by 5mm or 1/4 inch to the wrong side and press. Fold over again by 2.5cm or 1 inch and press. Edge stitch along the folded edge to create a casing, and then repeat these steps for the second pocket. On the bottom of the pocket there are 3 sets of box pleat markings, so make sure you've transferred them from the pattern to your fabric. With the wrong side of the pocket facing up, fold each outer marking in towards the centre marking. Press with your fingers to help them hold their shape and pin in place. There is a notch between each pleat, so make sure you're not using this as part of the pleat. Repeat these steps until both pockets have 3 pleats each. Cut your elastic to 47 centimeters or 18¼ inch, which should be the same width as your body lining piece. Hook a safety pin through one end of the elastic and thread it through the casing at the top of your pocket. Once the elastic is fully inside the casing, stitch one end in place 5mm or 1/4 inch from the edge, sewing over it a few times to secure. Pull the rest of the elastic through, then stitch the second end down the same way. Spend a bit of time making sure the fabric is evenly spaced across the elastic, then repeat these steps for your second pocket. Pin each pocket to a body lining piece, wrong side of pocket to right side of lining. Match the bottom notches and the side notches. The body lining piece has notches on the top and bottom edges, so make sure you align the bottom of the pocket with the correct edge, which has 5 notches. With right side facing up, sew 2 vertical lines from the bottom notches to the top of the pocket, dividing it into 3 sections. Sew directly over the elastic to keep the gathers in place. Repeat these steps for the other pocket. Now we're going to assemble the lining. In a similar way to how we attach the side panels to the main body, we're going to repeat this process for the lining. Pin the side lining on top of the pocket and body lining, right sides together and aligning the notches. Sew down the lining until 1 cm or 3/8 of an inch before the corner of the bottom layer, and again stop sewing and finish the seam with back stitching. Then snip horizontally from the fabric edge to the stitching, being careful not to snip your thread. Pivot the side lining 90 degrees to align with the bottom edge of the body lining, align the notches and then sew this edge together. Continue with this process of snipping and pivoting until all edges of the body lining are attached to the side lining. Attach the second pocket and body lining to the other edge of the side lining in the same way. Your lining should now look a little something like this. To finish it off, press the seams towards the side lining. Now we're going to make the ties. Fold both long edges of the tie over by 1 cm or 3/8 of an inch to the wrong side and press. Fold the tie in half lengthways and press again. The right sides of the fabric should now be on the outside with both folded edges enclosed. Unfold one end of the tie and fold it in half with right sides together. Then sew across the end and trim the seam allowance. Turn this end right side out and gently poke out the corner. Refold the long edges by tucking them back in along the original press lines. Give your tie another press so everything is nice and flat. Start from the raw edge and edge stitch all the way down the length of the tie. The finished end can be bulky, so starting from the open end helps to avoid your machine getting stuck. Repeat all these steps for the other tie. Now for the final assembly of the bag. On the right side of the quilted fabric, pin the raw edge of one tie to the center notch at the top of the bag. Pin both ends of one handle to the same side of the bag using the notches on either side of the tie. Make sure the top stitching on the handle aligns with a row of quilting on the bag and that your handle isn't twisted. Repeat these steps for the other side of the bag. Place the outer bag inside the lining right sides together and pin the lining to the outer bag around the top edge, aligning all the seams and notches. Mark a 10cm or 4-inch gap on one of the side panels along the top edge. This is where you'll turn the bag through later. Re-pin at the ties and handles to keep everything in place. As you're pinning the top edge, you'll find the outer bag seems a bit smaller than the lining. This is because the quilting has condensed its size, so just take your time and ease the quilted fabric around the lining. So around the top edge of the bag, minus the gap. While you're sewing, try to feel through the fabric or lift it to assess where the handles and ties are. When you reach a tie or handle, backstitch and sew over it again to make sure that it's secure. Take your time sewing this top seam, as like with the pinning, it will take a bit of patience to ease the outer bag to the lining. Turn the bag right side out through the gap so the quilted outer is on the outside and the lining sits neatly inside. Try to be very gentle as it's easy to rip the stitching while doing this. It's not the end of the world if this happens, as we will be sewing over this seam, but try your best to avoid it. Pin the seam allowance at the gap to close the opening. And then press around the whole top edge to make sure the lining sits neatly inside the bag. Top stitch around the entire top edge of the bag, sewing 5mm or 1/4 inch from the edge. There is a better angle of this in the next shot. And that's a wrap on the sewing tutorial for the Thea Tote Bag by Sunday Sewing Club. I hope you learnt something new and feel proud of what you've made. See you next time!